I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty so that you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Shen Yun, the dancing cult.
What is Shen Yun? Well, it's a dance troupe committed to spreading knowledge and appreciation of Chinese culture throughout the United States and the world. They're known for ubiquitous ads, brightly colored regalia, and also their connections to the Falun Gong, a shadowy cult of mainland Chinese expats living on a massive plot of land outside New York. Oh, and they low-key were instrumental in Trump's America coming into being. Act 1. A study in grace, wisdom, and virtues distilled from 5 millennia of grifters. The art of movement is quite possibly the most human of arts. It utilizes the human body as a canvas for expression, communication, and artistic immortality. It's also a way to keep fit. You know, drop a few pounds in a Zumba class or two. But the level of dance that we're discussing on today's episode is something else. It's the type of dance that shifts perceptions, that alters the way we think, that can convince us that our political perceptions are false, or at least it aspires to that. Well, that and a shitload of billboards. Mr. Spice, Mr. Spandy Spice. Have you ever seen a Shen Yun billboard before?
I don't think I've ever seen one in person. I've definitely seen them on the internet. Like I've seen pictures of them, and I've read stories about them. Prior to doing research for this episode. But I don't think I've ever seen one in real life.
There's one that's like on the 110 coming into downtown. So whenever my partner and I go visit her brother, when we come back into LA on the 110, there's one right there. And every time I point it out and I'm like, Shen Yun, they're crazy. They're crazy. Look at those guys. Shen Yun, it's a cult. It's a cult. That's crazy. I can't believe they were just allowed to advertise.
Yeah, I mean, that's while I have not seen that specific one, I do find it very kind of creepy and surreal whenever you do kind of like run into like something that you just know is a cult in the wild. I can't think of the name of it, but there's this chain of coffee shops that's owned by like a cult, and I'm just this is a terrible example because I can't remember the name of it. But there's a chain of coffee shops that's owned by a cult, and you can just go to the coffee shop. They have a couple of them. I think they're in the California area. Like I want to say in like an Ojai type place, and I've seen those. And it's bizarre when you've like read about it and you know what it is and you see it and you're just like, oh yeah, like this just feels like something that you read about that like was happening in the 1970s, but there's just like it's still happening now.
It's also weird how it felt like there was a time on the internet where the like Shen Yun billboard memes were not there, and then the next day, every meme was a Shen Yun billboard meme.
Yeah. I mean, and that's where I've like seen that. By the way, just really quick, so it's called the Yellow Deli. It's not like a coffee shop. It's actually like a little deli. It's like a little restaurant chain, and it's owned by a cult called the 12 Tribes. They're like a Christian doomsday cult. And yeah, the 12 Tribes.
That's weird. Yeah, I don't know about that one. And I honestly, I didn't even really know what Shen Yun was really before those memes started happening. And I only kind of knew the basics before going into the research for this episode. It was just kind of, oh yeah, they're like a cult and they have like a dance program or something. I don't know. Like the memes were just so omnipresent, you like couldn't escape it.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much. We're going to talk about this later in the episode, so I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but I was aware of Shen Yun after doing a deep dive on the Epoch Times, which is a newspaper which we're going to talk about later. But finding out the ties and the history behind the Epoch Times and how it was started and why it was started and how it has a relationship with this, it was bizarre to find out, and we'll talk about that later in the episode.
Shen Yun was founded in 2006 by Chinese expatriates and members of the Falun Gong cult. They reside on the Dragon Springs compound in Deer Park, New York, northwest of New York City. Falun Gong founder Li Hongzhi established both the cult and the definitely not supervillain lair. Li Hongzhi was born on July 7th, 1952. Li Hongzhi's personal biography differs wildly depending on who's telling the story. There's the more than likely unreliable version that the Chinese government has released, and then there's the hagiography, which is undoubtedly equally as unreliable that the Falun Gong has released. Multiple biographies released by the Falun Gong have stated that he was born in the town of Gongjiling in the Jilin province. In one account, it stated that he was born into a lower class and a deeply impoverished family. In an alternate version, his family's history says that they were referred to as ordinary intellectuals. All right, here's a photo. Here's our first photo of our boy Li Hongzhi. What do you think? What's this guy? What are his vibes?
This is kind of an unassuming photo. Unlike previous cult episodes that we've covered, we talked about I'm drawing a blank on the Japanese death cult, the name of the Japanese death cult.
I can't think of it either off the top of my head, so don't even, let's just say the Japanese death cult that did that terrorist attack in Tokyo in the 90s.
It's Aum Shinrikyo. I knew sometimes you can jiggle it loose by starting to Google it, and for some reason that makes you remember. Unlike Aum Shinrikyo, where you look at the pictures of the leader of that, which I'm once again forgetting, Shoko Asahara. Unlike that guy, where you see the early pictures of it, and you're just like, yeah, this dude is a cult leader. This guy looks like a dad, but he's wearing like this traditional sort of like, I don't know what the terminology for this sort of Chinese garb is, but he's sitting on a rock and he's sort of like doing this meditative stance. And he's got this sort of traditional Chinese garb on, but aside from that, he just kind of looks like a dad.
Yeah, he gives post midlife crisis Chia Young Fat, who used to be a car salesman but has now pivoted into being a cult leader vibes.
Yeah, definitely like used car salesman who like on the weekends practices transcendental meditation to manage his anxiety of having to meet his quotas.
Yeah, totally.
He's like, they tell me I got to sell a car a day. It's impossible. I try. I get these people on there. I sell them on. I tell them about this 5 CD changer. They don't care. The 5 CD changers, nobody wants them anymore. Now people are starting to. They just want to go back to the basics. They like the little thing where you put the tape into the deck and then you have the little CD player and you plug it into that. Nobody wants the 5 CD changer anymore because you have to go into the trunk and put them in there. You have to stop your car every time you want to change CDs. It's impractical. I can't sell these 5 CD changers anymore. Calm down, man. All right, just meditate. Just meditate.
I think I'm going to start a cult.
And honestly, that's most of these cults, like that's literally what it is. It's just like they just have a breaking point like that, and then they just start a cult. Like whereas you or I in a moment like that, we were just like, I'm just gonna take a nap and start tomorrow over again. This guy's like, I'm gonna take a nap and file a LLC business license for a cult.
The one aspect that both official biographies can agree on is that he was ostensibly a spiritual warrior from birth. Supposedly, at the age of 4, he trained with Quan Jue, the 10th heir of the Great Law of Buddha school. And by 8, he had acquired the superb Great Law with supernatural powers, including invisibility and levitation. So, you buying that? You think both official biographies got that right? You think this guy can turn invisible?
They both said it. It's like how could it not be true? Although that's kind of funny though, that there's, because it's like obviously the Falun Gong biography is like propping this guy up as this like spiritual leader, and the biography of him from the Chinese government is sort of like demonizing the cult, because as this is getting ahead of things a little bit, but like the Chinese government and the Falun Gong did not get along very well. But I like that even in their version of it, they were like, yeah, he could turn invisible, though.
I think that's more. I don't think the Chinese government is saying he could turn invisible. I think there were two different biographies published by the Falun Gong, which they both said that he could turn invisible in there. But I love the idea that the Chinese government was like, yeah, he can turn invisible.
Like, listen, he's a menace to society. He's a total he's a sham. He's misleading many people away from the ideals of communism. But also, to be fair to him, he could like go and sneak into a candy store and like take whatever he wanted, like that. If you want to do pros and cons.
Yeah. More spiritual study and Gennaro religious character style situations are proclaimed, which ultimately lead to the weird part of most religious figures. They just skip from ages 8 to 30. In 1982, Li moved to the city of Changchun, where he gained civil employment, whatever that means. This also implies that he served in the military previously. At some point in the 80s, Li had a daughter, married, and began living a quotidian life. 2 years later, in 1984, he began writing what would be known as the Falun Dafa, the holy text of the Falun Gong. He supposedly worked on it until 1989, taking aspects of the religious training he had gained throughout his life and synthesizing them into a new system influenced by Taoism and Buddhism. He began finalizing this system for spiritual enlightenment by testing it on small groups of students, and by 1992, it was ready for the big show. And this is where things really take off. But before we dive into it, let's examine the Chinese Communist Party that Li spent his formative years under. Born in 1951 or 52, his parents divorced while he was a toddler. He remained in the custody of his mother. In 1955, he relocated to Changchun. He did not attend Buddhist workshops, but instead attended standard primary school education. He did not attend high school, but ultimately got a Chinese equivalent of a GED during the 1980s, when he would have been in his 30s.
Imagine, just paint for yourself in your mind palace the guy that you knew in high school and I know that this guy exists. I know that you met this guy. I'm going to tell the story knowing with full confidence that I'm going to be referring to a specific person that you've known. But imagine the guy who in high school, maybe sophomore year, was like, bro, like high school is a fucking scam, man. Like, you can just drop out and get your GED, and like, it doesn't even look different on job applications. Like, they can't tell the difference between a GED and a real high school diploma. So I'm dropping out and I'm just gonna get my GED. And then you never saw that person again. Or you maybe did because you were friends with them, and sometimes you would like meet up with them and they would just be like hanging out at their house, like having the time of their fucking life. They just dropped out of school and they're just doing nothing. Imagine that guy. And then think about him starting a cult and leading and shaping the minds of thousands of people into his philosophies.
Chinese government documents repeatedly state what an unremarkable student Li was, and that his only extraordinary skill was that he played the trumpet recreationally.
And you know that guy played the trumpet. You know that guy played the trumpet.
That guy totally. And he was like, he tried to start a ska band with like everybody.
Literally, like, I don't know about you, but this is literally a guy. This is literally a guy. It was a trombone, but this is literally a guy. And he's also somebody that I feel like would try to start a cult. We all know this guy. We all
100% know this guy. After school, he held a, quote, series of unremarkable jobs. Some of them included working at an army horse farm, being a trumpet player for the local police department, and a clerk at an oil procurement company. Li Hongzhi published the Falun Dafa, or The Great Law of the Wheel of Dharma, on May 13th, 1992, his 41st birthday.
First of all, two things. First of all, I really just have to go back to this and really hit on this again, that everything you just said is just literally like, it's spot on with what I was talking about. It's that guy. And I really just have to hammer in that, like, the difference between that weird, shitty guy that you knew in high school and a cult leader is just like 5% more confidence. Like, every day we are on the verge of a new cult starting if like that guy just gets one extra pep talk.
All those Freds, if they rise up, we are so fucked.
There's so many of them. And all they need is just that one extra pep talk.
Cult it up now!
And also, it's just proof alone. This guy, he was an unremarkable student. He drifted through life, dropped out of high school and got the Chinese equivalent of a GED, worked a bunch of menial jobs. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just unremarkable life. And then on his 41st birthday, he pulled it together and he achieved greatness. Like that, just let it be a lesson out there. You can, it doesn't matter how late you are, you can get in. Don't feel like you missed the boat. You can still start a cult on your 41st birthday.
For the next 2 years, he traveled throughout China, giving lectures and teaching his methodologies from the Falun Dafa. He quickly began amassing a rabid following. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, China saw a huge uptick in Qigong. So what is Qigong?
What is Qigong? Qigong refers to either a singular form of exercise or a systematic practice, either in form of movement or simply with tranquility, centered with Qi. What is Qi then? Qi is a very important term for Chinese culture, for traditional Chinese medicine, particularly for Taoist medicine. As the saying goes, 人活一口气. A human being essentially lives on Qi. We human beings come from Qi and we back to Qi. So our physical body is actually not that important because our life vitality is chiefly above the, inner Qi. So to practice Qigong means to enhance your Qi, to strengthen your Qi, to better your Qi, to circulate to your Qi. We say, 药补不如食补，食补不如气补. In a special situation, we need a certain medicine. Very much, we should have a very good way of diet. But in the long run, in the fundamental way, so how to enhance your Qi, that's priority.
So, that seems pretty harmless so far. Like I can get behind that. I mean, it's like, the text on the screen was when he was saying that was medicine is not as good as food. I feel like in some ways I can agree with that. And in some ways I feel like that's slightly a dangerous sentiment, but ultimately harmless. Just talking about sort of meditation and mindfulness and, communicating with the energies around you, like totally fine. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, sounds pretty good. Let's watch this next clip.
The strangest thing David took me to see in China was here in Beijing at Purple Bamboo Park.
If you can believe that there is an energy called qi flowing through the body, that it can be felt and manipulated, then perhaps you can see why some Chinese go one step further. They call this teacher Master Shi, and he tells his new students, come here every morning at dawn for 3 years, and then I'll know you're serious.
3 years? Right, and that's just the beginning?
Yes, but I'm warning you, Bill. What Master Shi claims he can do just doesn't look real. Master Shi will tell you he just used qi to throw his students. This is where a lot of the Chinese stories come.
If you can't tell from listening to this is one of those like bullshit like psychic martial arts things where, people like basically roll over for the master in order to perpetuate the teaching, and it's him like gently nudging a guy and the dude like flying backwards.
Yeah, it's like it's actually kind of funny because it's like not what it's not what you're thinking, where like they're just a bunch of dudes like they're just wearing like members only jackets. It's like a bunch of like I said before, it just looks like a bunch of dads in a park somewhere, and they're practicing this qi martial arts meditation style, and they have this old master who's this old dude, and he's wearing like a members only style jacket, and he's got one of those like golf caps on, and as a younger guy who comes up and like kind of tries to punch him or puts his fist up, and then the old guy like grabs his fist, and then he just like barely moves, and then the guy gets like thrown across the room. And we're getting into this thing, this like fake martial arts phenomenon that existed in like the 70s and 80s. But we should do a whole episode about this. But like there's all these martial arts, like magical martial arts guru people that cropped up, and you know, some of them are Chinese, some of them are American. But they're these dudes that just claim to have these like magical martial arts abilities to harness chi and things like that. And they basically have these dojos that practice in this fake martial arts. And it's like either all their disciples are just like in on the kayfabe, or they're just like so dedicated to thinking that it's real that they're almost like hypnotized. And so people will come in, like these guys, these like American dudes. I don't know who these guys are, but they come in. Yeah, these like journalists, they come in and they watch. And then like these young dudes just let this guy throw them around. And they're just, you know, they're flinging themselves across the room. They're pretending like he's like shooting them with energy or whatever. And once again, I don't know whether they're just in on the kayfabe or if they're so indoctrinated into thinking that this is real that they're just like, you know, they're just like, it's like a psychosomatic thing. I don't know, but it's really fascinating.
After its initial introduction, the teachings of Li Hongzhi were accepted by the Communist Party that was in control, and even held up as a shining example of Qigong. They were recognized by the state-run Chia Qigong Scientific Research Center. Li was deemed to be a Qigong master and was authorized to teach nationwide. He spent the next 2 years teaching his philosophies and was even given multiple awards by the People's Republic of China. Tensions rose across the board, though, in 1996 as Falun Gong's popularity skyrocketed. Most people think that this was largely due to the fact that the Falun Gong was free, or largely free, version of Qigong. Qigong masters accused Li of undercutting them and ruining the industry standards. The Chinese government was approached by Li looking to enter into a joint venture, which he eventually spurned. So now we're going to watch this Falun Gong exercise tape. So basically, Qigong is like an exercise movement that really took a hold in the 1980s and 90s in China, and Li basically is like the Richard Simmons of cult leaders.
Yeah. And as that kind of alluded to, the Chinese government would sort of like bolster these guys because basically, you know, these dudes who you know ran these Qigong dojos and exhibited this style. It sort of like bolstered the culture of China. So the Chinese government would loved these guys, and they would give them money and you know, give them publicity because they're basically just disseminating Chinese culture, you know, throughout the country and upholding traditional Chinese values. So that's why these dudes sitting there pretending to like blast people with chi would literally get like state sponsorships.
Exercise 1. Conjoin the hands. Maitreya stretching his back. Stretch. Tathagata pouring energy into the top of his head. Press the hands together. Turn the hands as if holding a ball. Hands pointing to heaven and earth. Stretch.
So this is Li Hongzhi on a green screen wearing the yellow traditional Chinese outfit from earlier, performing Qigong in the least dynamic way possible.
Yeah, you would never in a million years look at this and be like, yeah, this guy goes on to start a cult.
Relax. Press the hands together. 2 dragons diving into the sea. Stretch. Relax. Press the hands together.
Yeah, this is just the Chinese version of, there was this exercise tape that was at a friend of mine's house because he lived in his grandma's house and his grandma had this tape from back in the 80s. and it was called Silver Foxes. And it was an exercise tape where it was a bunch of the moms and dads of movie stars. So like it was like Al Pacino's mom, and then like
And Pacino.
yeah, it was like Al Pacino's mom, and then like Warren Beatty's mom, and a bunch of other ones. And it was just like exercises for old people. This is just that. This is just the Chinese equivalent of that.
From 1996 to 1999, the Chinese government stopped supporting widespread Falun Gong and Qigong practices. In June of 1996, the Guangming Daily, a state-run newspaper, published a screed condemning the organization and practices as feudal superstition. By 1999, the state sports commission stated that there were close to 70 million Falun Gong practitioners in China. Is this true? Who knows? The number does appear in both the Falun Gong and state-run newspaper sources. However, it's thought that the real number might be somewhere around 2 million, but 70 million was, Cold War-like agreed-upon figure to stroke fear on both sides of the debate style stuff. Eventually, and this is a massive oversimplification, Li and his Falun Gong followers were driven out of China and took up a life as expatriates in residence in New York. What does someone who leads a cult and enjoys wearing hella comfy pajamas do with their free time? They start a performance dance troupe, obviously.
And it just to like put a pin on that, or kind of put a punctuation mark at the end of that. Essentially, what I was talking about, that a lot of these practitioners of these sort of traditional these meditation practices that were tied to traditional Chinese culture were sort of bolstered by the Chinese government. But at this point in the 90s, they suddenly sort of like had a change of heart of that. And I don't know whether it was like because of the ballooning number of people that were sort of into it, and they almost saw it as like a threat of like, oh, these organizations are like growing all these members and there's millions of people that are following these people. Suddenly they weren't interested in supporting them anymore. And then they sort of like almost did an about face and started saying that they were like clinging on to feudal superstition. They just completely changed their position on it. And so effectively at this time in the 1990s, they made it illegal to practice this in public. So like you legally weren't allowed to go out and do these dances. And if you were caught doing it, you'd be arrested by the state.
It's a whole lot of footloose going on over there.
Yeah, it's a full country of footloose.
Escape from Planet Footloose.
Yeah, just the fucking what's his name? God damn it, what is his name? I was just talking about him yesterday. I was talking about how John Lithgow. I was just talking with my wife yesterday about how he looks the exact same age now in that show, The Old Man with Jeff Bridges, as he looked in the 90s in Third Rock from the Sun.
All I've got to say to you right now, Spandrew, is dance while you can, monkey boy.
Yeah, I mean, who didn't know that was coming? But anyway, yeah,
that was a Buckaroo Banzai reference for anybody who didn't get it. John Lithgow plays the main antagonist in Buckaroo Banzai. Dance while you can, the monkey boy is a very famous line based on a costume fitter that John Lithgow worked with at Universal, and so he had that costume fitter record all of his dialogue into a tape machine, and he had a very thick Italian accent. And so for the sake of the performance of the character, he was playing an alien. He named John Morphin. Is that his name? That's not his name. What the fuck is his character's name? He said all of his characters' dialogue in a weird pseudo-Italian accent. One of his most iconic lines in the film is "Dance while you can, the monkey boy."
He also played Dick, the patriarch and main character of the sitcom Third Rock from the Sun from the 90s, where a family of aliens crash lands on Earth to study humanity. They form a sort of domestic family unit and experience the daily mundanities of human living through the lens of other people. And it's the greatest sitcom that's ever been created.
Dance while you can, monkey boy.
Yes, but all that to say, John Lithgow was the leading China. I mean, the joke has been long buried at this point, but that was what I was going to say.
Dance while you can, monkey boy. Act 2. Cults in an elevator, dancing it up while we're throwing down. Shen Yun was founded in 2006 and carried out its first tour in 2007, with roughly 90 dancers in their troupe.
Before communism, China had a glorious past. What if you could bring it back? Since 2006, Shen Yun has been reviving the essence of Chinese civilization, deeply rooted in ancient values like compassion, honesty, and faith. Yet decades of destruction, deceit, and violence have nearly destroyed a nation's values, along with its own identity. So how do you revive what has been lost in today's China? At the core of Shen Yun is an ancient art form, classical Chinese dance. In classical Chinese dance, movement begins with the heart. This characteristic makes classical Chinese dance richly expressive and unparalleled in storytelling. Shen Yun's original music blends East and West, and we preserve traditional techniques throughout our production. Our artists follow the principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance. This brings a greater depth to our art. Every year, Shen Yun premieres a completely new production with new stories, new costumes, new music, and new choreography. This undertaking is only possible with the devotion of each and every artist, for in our hearts is a mission greater than us all. Join us to reclaim the beauty, wisdom, humor, and drama of 5,000 years.
So I have three things to say. First of all, those dances and the costuming and the choreography are actually all beautiful. It's
They're fucking badass.
yeah, it's really amazing. Also, the voice, the narrator of that, which obviously is just some white guy that they hired. I don't know what it is, but there's a very particular type of voiceover, and maybe it's just the same guy. Like, you know how the movie narrator voiceover guy was just the same guy for years, and then he died, and then another guy now does all the movie voiceovers. Like, I don't know if maybe it's the same guy, but there's that has the very particular aesthetic of a straight-to-video Christian movie, like from some weird religious production company. Like, that's just what that sounded like. But I just wanted to quickly touch on this before we get into this, because I just really want to hammer it home, just the strange convalescence of things coming together in this story, because it's just really bizarre. It's very bizarre. So you have these people, the Falun Gong, who are practicing this Qi meditative dance style, and the the Chinese Communist Party views these groups of people as a threat for, reasons that aren't exactly pinpointed, but you could say that like they saw they saw this adherence to Chinese culture as like a threat to communist progressive ideals. And I don't necessarily say progressive necessarily in a positive way, just this idea of like moving forward to a new form of governance that didn't traditionally exist in the country. And they maybe saw it as a threat of like, you guys, basically this idea of like, you guys are trying to keep us back here. We want to sort of bring everybody over here to this new thing. And this adherence to culture is a threat to that. So they, because of this, they essentially, as we were joking about before, they make dancing illegal in all of China. And I don't mean all dancing, but just this specific type of movement, of body movement. And so they obviously don't like this at all. And they hold a massive grudge against the Chinese Communist Party because of this. They move to the United States, to New York City. They start this dance troupe. And in this trailer we just watched, you see the beginnings of this thing where, as we're going to learn, Shen Yun is very anti-communist. And, whatever you think of communism or whatever your thoughts are on these governing systems, the reality of the situation is that a majority of their dislike of communism is specifically tied to this grudge that they have against the government for making them stop doing their body movement cult, basically. So we see the beginnings of this weird traditionalist rhetoric of like, before communism moved into the country, China had values and culture and all these things. And the way that is going to intermingle with very specific political circumstances happening in the United States over the years, and what it essentially leads to is just it's probably one of the weirdest things that's ever happened in the history of the world.
The other thing that I want to touch on before we move too far ahead is like, can you imagine what it would be like to be one of these dancers? Like, you go to school, you're, dedicating your life to this very narrow window where your body can actually perform your chosen art form. You only have a certain number of years that you're physically capable of doing these things, these elaborate moves with your knees and your elbows and your shoulders and your hips before they just get thrashed and you have to become a dance teacher in a strip mall in fucking Encino. And you get this huge opportunity. You're going to be a part of this traveling dance troupe. You're going to go all over the world. You're going to be given accolades and you're going to be compensated well and paid for your time. And then you have to make the Sophie's choice of, do you want to do this and be able to live your dream, but know that you're contributing to a highly damaging cult? Or do you want to not take this opportunity and maybe not, maybe not be able to use, practice your art form ever to this degree at this level? That truly is like a terrifying predicament. It's so scary to me.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to congratulate you on working Sophie's Choice into your vocabulary so that you can sort of like get it. So that you could, it's like you use a word enough, and then you'll. I
know what a Sophie's Choice is. I know this is a reference. I know this is a reference to when we worked in the office together, and I misspoke once and got the Sophie's Choice wrong. But I know what a Sophie's Choice is. I know what a Sophie's Choice is.
Well, I mean, history says otherwise, but. But yeah, that I mean, and then that really is. I think that that really is what it is. It's like in this, kind of going back to the Foxcatcher Farms episode, and this idea of like, hey, there's no funding for Olympic wrestling in the United States. Like, if you want to be an Olympic wrestler in the United States, like, you're just fucked because nobody gives a shit about it. Like, if you live in Russia, in the Soviet Union, like, they're just like they're just subsidizing wrestling. But if you live here, like, there's just nothing. You could like go live on this weird guy's compound and he'll just give you access to unlimited money and resources, and you can live your life following your dream of being a wrestler and have your whole life subsidized in that way. But you have to go live on this weird, creepy guy's farm who's just like holds his wife at gunpoint for no reason and is like just a really strange, creepy guy that you just do not want to be alone with. And it's that exact same thing where it's like, there's a ton of money here. We're going to stage these elaborate productions that are just like Broadway level, if not beyond that. Just like these productions that like rival like dance productions that were put on for emperors in the fucking 17th century or some shit. But you have to like be in a cult, a weird anti-communist cult that's just mad at the government because they wouldn't let them dance. They're just a bunch of Kevin Bacons.
Truly, Shen Yun is the Kevin Bacon, the collective Kevin Bacon of China. Shen Yun is a traditional Chinese dance troupe that tells morality plays ripped from the pages of China's past and brought to the present for modern audiences. Their tagline, reviving 5,000 years of Chinese civilization, says it all, doesn't it? Well, it's not quite that simple. It's the touring and cultural outreach group for the Falun Gong, after all, so it's going to get weird. Think Cirque du Soleil meets Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but with like way more anti-communist messages. In one musical number, the performers sing lyrics like, "Atheism and evolution are deadly ideas. Modern trends destroy what makes us human." In one musical number, it even goes as far as to feature a red tsunami threatening to destroy the world and an earthquake that is caused by the faces of Karl Marx and Chairman Mao. Today, Shen Yun boasts 6 touring troupes made up of roughly 40 dancers each. They're all trained at the Fei Tan Academy, which is situated on the Falun Gong estates in New York. So another weird aspect of this situation that we haven't quite touched on is there are all these rumors of organ harvesting, which is kind of terrifying. I don't know that I fully believe all of them, but I figured we should touch on it and mention that there's like pseudo-credible accusations that they've kidnapped people and harvested organs from them, which is like a whole other level of terrifying.
Like, no, you don't understand. We bought organs from churches for our theater. We just bought a bunch of organs. It was a classic game of telephone. You know, it just got lost in translation. We just bought a bunch of organs. It takes a lot of organs to stage a dance sequence like this. You know how many organs you need? We go through like 10 organs a day.
But in response to the rise of the Shen Yun meme thing that happened maybe 10 years ago online, Shen Yun has started kind of making, they started their own kind of cultural outreach and internet persona developing. So they've started their own YouTube channel. They post videos under puppet YouTube channels. It's a very strange situation. Yeah, let's watch this propaganda that was posted on the Shen Yun official YouTube account.
One Westerner's fascination with traditional Chinese culture took him to China, but the experience didn't live up to his expectations. It was only after he returned to the U.S. did he find the true China he had dreamed about, in a most unexpected place. We sit down with Jared Mattson to hear his story. Reading Chinese philosophy isn't exactly the norm for most Americans, but Jared Mattson is a rare exception. For him, traditional Chinese culture isn't something too remote or irrelevant. Instead, the ancient wisdom in it gave him new perspective.
So when I was in high school, I already started to learn Chinese. And I started to learn about traditional Chinese culture. I was very fascinated. It just seemed to talk about things that I'd never even imagined, about Confucianism and Taoism. And then I went to China. I went to China in 1994.
But the trip didn't go according to plan.
It seemed right the very moment I landed in China, it was a wake-up call. Oh, this is communist society. This is not this anymore. Honestly, I was incredibly disappointed, and it was very disheartening, I suppose.
The experience didn't measure up to his expectations, but eventually, Mattson found what he had thought was a lost cause, not in Beijing, but in New York. He is now a master of ceremonies for US-based classical Chinese dance company Shen Yun. He says that's where he discovered the true China before it was tainted by the Communist Party.
Then I heard about Shen Yun, and I came to Shen Yun and I thought, this is exactly what I had been interested in from the get-go. And then we can portray it on stage, things that I'd been thinking about, only trying to imagine what it was like in my head. And then I get to see it on stage. I get to see people portray these roles. I was blown away. I It had to be part of the Shen Yun.
The classical Chinese dance style Shen Yun performs in is an antiquity dating back at least 3,000 years to the grand courts of Chinese emperors. And from that ancient tradition, Madsen found answers that modern science and technology couldn't give him. Why do you think it's important to have this push for authentic?
Yeah, so yeah, this is posted on the Shen Yun YouTube channel, but the truly the diabolical thing about this is that, I mean, if you're hearing that, I wouldn't blame you for thinking that was like a news packet from like an actual news source, but they've like shot this to seem like it's like a news segment from something, but it's like it's kayfabe. It's a video that they shot from not a news organization with not a news anchor, just some random part of, one of the like maybe one of the dancers, who knows? And they've just exactly made it seem like some kind of news segment, so that if you stumble across this, it's literal, like you said, it's literal propaganda. You see this and you're like, oh, it's like some kind of news piece about how communism is bad or whatever. But all it is just like a video that they shot in their fucking theater.
It's so weird. They even have like the pop in black and white B-roll footage with voiceover over it. They even have them sitting in a well-lit pseudo library looking room. It's just so weird that it's like we're a legitimate news show, and we definitely news because news. And they shoot the opening in a faux green screen newsroom, and the interviewer is just like, yeah, as a Westerner, I really wanted the Chinese to just be like for 3,000 years ago, but I got there and there were cars. That was horrible.
It makes no sense. He's like, yeah, I just thought became interested in China, and I went there, and it wasn't like fucking the past. It was just like our country, but just China. And then I came back and I saw people putting on plays that were set 3,000 years ago, and I was like, this is what I wanted to see. I wanted to go back in time.
It's fucking ridiculous. Fucking ridiculous.
And he's just some guy too. He's the chyron under his name, it just says whatever his name is, MC at Shen Yun. He's the MC. He's the guy that just announces the fucking show, and they're interviewing him for some reason.
The Falun Gong and Shen Yun seem like they're pretty benign though, right? They're just a standard run-of-your-mill crazy people cult proselytizing the end of the world, right? Kinda, but they also do this bullshit.
So the Epoch Times is a conservative news outlet. They have newspapers and they have a website. And what you'll see is very pro-Trump conservative, ultra-conservative content. It's come up in 2016 as a real player in the conservative ecosystem. Before then, it was really known as just a Chinese language newspaper that was associated with Falun Gong. And Falun Gong, it's a movement, it's a religious spiritual movement that's headed by a man named Master Li Hongzhu. Master Li lives in Dragon Springs, New York. He lives upstate, and he is the head of this religion. So all the people in this religion have to volunteer their time at one of the media arms. Now there's the Epoch Times, and that's the newspaper. And then there is NDTV, and that's the television component and the video component. And then there's Shen Yun. And Shen Yun, if you've seen the ubiquitous advertisements everywhere, it's a traditional Chinese dance troupe with a very anti-communist China message. So the whole point of all of these things, whether it's the Epoch Times or Shen Yun, is to relay this message that the end of the world is coming. If you are aligned with communism, you will go to a sort of hell. And if you are not aligned with communism, if you align yourself with Falun Gong, then you will be spared and you will go to heaven. So it's sort of an apocalyptic sort of cult, not unlike a lot of religions. But But what makes it interesting is that they're using their money to really back Trump, and they're aligning themselves with evangelicals and conservatives on the internet to really push a pro-Trump message. And it really seems to be working. They have gone from a really fledgling newspaper where no one was really reading it. It cost $1. Sometimes it was free on the streets of New York. And now they are everywhere. Their senior editors were in Trump Tower earlier this year interviewing Laura Trump. They're at CPAC. They're interviewing congressmen, celebrities like, Diamond and Silk and Candace Owens and Ted Cruz. They're really coming up in the conservative movement, and it's important to know who's behind this. Something else they've done that's really interesting lately, and why we started looking at them, is they started buying Facebook ads. They've spent $1.5 million on 11,000 Facebook ads this year alone, and all of the ads are very pro-Trump, but they also push a conspiratorial message. And Falun Gong itself is really interesting because it started in the 1990s. It started in China, and it was headed by Master Li. And Master Li sort of came up with this new practice. It was a little bit of mysticism.
We can basically stop here. This is all the stuff we've already done now.
Don't mansplain us. We already fucking talked about this shit.
So, yeah, I feel like everybody saw Epoch Times stuff during the 2020 election, but I don't know that everybody knows what it is or where it comes from or what the kind of like connections are. So I figured we should probably talk about that. So Epoch Times is the propaganda newspaper wing of the Falun Gong. They're pretty, a right-wing anti-communist thing that I've seen it around for a long time, but I'd never really read it because I was like, it's just like a fucking free newspaper, you know what I mean? Whereas, during the lead up to the 2020 elections, it was like every 5 minutes there was a new crazier and crazier Epoch Times story that was getting passed around. And I was like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah, the truly crazy thing is prior to the year 2020, and it's funny because I said Epoch Times earlier, and I'll explain that in a second. But the Epoch Times was I've been aware of the Epoch Times for years. And at first, the Epoch Times was basically like, if you ever are in a slightly hippie-ish city and you go to a street corner and you see those little machines, those little things where you open it up and take papers out, and they're just like free papers or whatever, there will be an Epoch Times one. And I saw Epoch Times papers all the time when I lived in Santa Cruz, California, and I've seen them in other places. And then after that, then they went into the stage where like you would see Epoch Times articles shared by people in like Facebook groups and things like that were like these weird doomsday predictions saying that like a meteor was going to hit the earth or whatever. And it was an article on the Epoch Times. Cause they're like a doomsday cult, and they talk about all these like apocalyptic prophecies and things. So you would see these bogus, these like hoax articles saying that the world was going to end. And then something truly bizarre happened in 2020, and not as bizarre if you just weren't aware of the Epoch Times, but if you knew what the Epoch Times was, truly bizarre, which is in 2020, in like starting around April, May, somewhere around that time, the Epoch Times rebranded itself, started calling itself the Epoch Times to get rid of the conspiracy doomsday connotation of the word epoch. And they hired a bunch of white, bookish looking dudes to be on their editorial staff. And I started getting these ads for the Epoch Times with these dudes that look like you and me, being like, did you know that, in 2011, Hillary Clinton, fucking defrauded the American people or whatever? Just like classic, like alt-right talking points coming from these like bookish looking white guys with glasses and suits. And it was literally like, you could almost say that maybe like the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro like took a page out of this book and like use this strategy for far greater success. But I started seeing those ads for that version of the Epoch Times or the Epoch Times in 2020, and it was surreal. I was like, this fucking weird conspiracy theory doomsday cult paper? They've now branded themselves as like a far-right conservative truth magazine. And I would get those ads in front of every single video on YouTube for months. And it was very specifically like far-right conservative. And the ads didn't really paint it as pro-Trump because I think they were trying to project themselves as like, we're like an alternative news source that tells the truth or whatever. But it was very clearly like far-right conservative and like anti-democrat and like hard anti-communist, which is what I went back to before, which is like there's this weird convalescence of interests where you have the Falun Gong and Shen Yun who have this anti-communism stance based on their traditional values in China. And they saw this opportunity in 2020 where they were like, oh shit, like these people hate communism more than we do. Maybe if we like wiggle our way into this community, we can get bigger and we can spread our message even further. So they just spent a ton of money on YouTube advertising, hired these like white dudes to be the face of the company as these like young millennial conservative reporters. And they just started spreading a bunch of like alt-right conservative propaganda. I mean, they did this one thing where they had this like exclusive interview on the Epoch Times YouTube channel with some woman who like had an eyewitness account that like the fucking COVID-19 was like a man-made virus that was purposely spread into the world. They saw this opportunity and they just fucking grabbed it.
Based in New York City and part of the shell corporations named Epoch Media Group, it's literally a puppet organization run by the Falun Gong. It's such a frustrating reading experience, in fact, that it's actually blocked in mainland China. Okay, that's not true. It's just censored there. In 2019, a report conducted by NBC found the Epoch Times to be the second largest pro-Trump Facebook campaign advertiser on the globe. They played a vital role in his 2016 victory. They successfully harnessed animus to set American upon American, and they continue to do so today. Here's an excerpt from an Atlantic article written by Simon Van Zwalenwood.
The Epoch Times was founded in 2000 by John Tang, an Atlanta-based follower of the Chinese spiritual movement Falun Gong, whose members you might have seen doing meditative exercises in parks, and whose living messiah is Li Hongzhi, a cherubic-faced man generally shown wearing dark suits. The movement, which claims to have millions of adherents, encourages believers to abandon lust, greed, alcohol, and other worldly attachments. Some of the more unusual characteristics of its outlook include a distrust of medical doctors and a belief in malevolent, earth-roaming aliens who created impious technology such as video games. In 1999, the Chinese government concluded that Falun Gong was growing too popular. Beijing labeled the movement a cult and suppressed it. But Falun Gong flourished among the Chinese diaspora, and its teachings took on a fervent anti-communist bent. The Epoch Times has sought to maintain a certain distance from Falun Gong, and its right-wing politics come across at first glance as no more cultish than those of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon's old Washington Times. For a decade and a half, the paper's affiliation, like its politics, hardly mattered. Even as it established outposts around the world, now in 36 countries, the Epoch Times occupied a position of near irrelevance. Its name, absurdly redundant, managed to sound dull and bogus at once. I've walked by Epoch Times newspaper vending machines on countless occasions, never pausing to grab a copy. Each display was an anti-Pandora's box, stifling any curiosity to open it. Recently, though, Balmakov started showing up in everybody's social media feeds. The paper had begun supporting Donald Trump, and in 2019, the Epoch Times had launched itself into the higher echelons of conservative media. By the end of that year, according to Facebook, the newspaper, together with a network linked to the Epoch Media Group, which publishes the Epoch Times, had spent some $11 million in advertising on the platform. Republican A-listers appeared on its YouTube shows, right-wing pundits in its print pages. Its web traffic spiked. The Epoch Times can currently claim the most popular Apple newspaper app in the country. The New York Times is number 2. The newspaper was distinguishable from more inflammatory outlets by its staid prose and original reporting, and by offering features such as recipes and a goopish lifestyle section. The affiliated television network, New Tang Dynasty, with 30 million Facebook followers, has the sterile look of a satellite news channel you might find on TV in a European hotel. Watching, I'd sometimes zone out to a human interest story about synthetic hamburgers or to the weather report. But there was no predicting when the content would get weird. Hyper suspicious of centralized government, it takes the notion of the deep state for granted. It has extensively promoted the false claim that the Obama administration spied on Trump's 2016 campaign, which segues neatly into its refusal to accept the legitimacy of Biden's victory. Doppelganger sites such as Vision Times and America Daily, reportedly launched by or populated with former Epoch Times figures, have leavened far-right content with gentler offerings about, say, classical Chinese paintings. A series on the occult Edge of Wonder became a fire hose of content about QAnon, amplifying its foundational proposition that Washington is run by a pedophile cabal. The show, which was produced by NTD but later claimed to be independent, was recently scrubbed from YouTube. The Epoch Times has denied any involvement with these sites. Last summer, I became a print subscriber to the Epoch Times for $16.90 a month. The paper is delivered to my home every Wednesday. I notice at the back of each issue a deadly new installment in an 18-part series on the far-reaching tentacles of communism. From installment number 7, as expounded previously, sexual chaos is also an innate feature of communist ideology. Beginning in 2020, the Epoch Times gained new resonance. For years, its anti-communism had seemed oddly beside the point. Then a deadly pandemic emerged in China, where the government muzzled whistleblowers and covered up the virus's early spread. They've been waiting for so long to find some large-scale evidence of the abject villainy of China, one former NTD employee told me. Now COVID comes along and checks off all the boxes. Suddenly, the Epoch Times wall-to-wall coverage of the CCP virus was being amplified across the American right. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who recently sat for an interview with the paper, pushed the hatched in the lab theory. Trump called the virus a real bad present from China.
I mean, the thing that's so crazy to me is that I feel like the other outgrowths of cults in the States, like Scientology or, Mormonism or, media entities that are connected with those various organizations. Wait, what'd you say? Entity? I feel like culturally we have a better understanding that they're connected to a cult, even if like a certain percentage of people don't know that, there's just an ingrained understanding that like Scientology was created here and it had a not so reputable origination point, where because this comes from foreign nationals and its history is kind of obscured via immigration and language barriers and a literal other country's political dynamics, I don't think Americans understand that it's connected to a cult in the same way, which is kind of fascinating to me that like even as fast as internet travel or information travels today, there's still the final frontier of kind of like context laundering is the language barrier.
Yeah, and as I said before, like people definitely don't know what the Epoch Times is. And the even more diabolical thing that they did is, like I said before, they like rebranded themselves and hired this like front-facing team of these like Ben Shapiro-esque white dudes to be to be the face of the organization, to make it seem like it was another Daily Wire or InfoWars type place, or maybe a little bit more tame than InfoWars. I don't think they were trying to come out and seem like that much of a conspiracy theory organization, but like, you know what I mean? Like they just completely sanitizing and rebranding themselves as a whole different thing so that you had no idea the origins of it at all. And then, but then as you start to look into it and you're just like, oh, it's just like this sort of like far right conservative media organization. But for some reason, like half of their stories are about how the Chinese government is terrible. Interesting.
Yeah, it just happens to be that way. Yeah. Oh, what a strange coincidence that just half to 70% of the stuff you talk about is like the evil of the Chinese government. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I remember one of the YouTube ads that I saw in 2020, and I don't know whether this actually happened or not, and I don't even. It could have been made up, but also maybe it could have been true. I mean, there is censorship in China that could have possibly caused this. I didn't look into it, so I don't really care. But there was a story where there was an ad where they were just like, it was one of those dudes, one of these like American guys that's supposedly a reporter for the Epoch Times, and reporting on the fact that one of their Chinese print factories was raided by the government. It was their print factory was vandalized by anonymous vandals. They broke in and like threw a bunch of like ink all over a bunch of their papers and like damaged their printing, their print presses or whatever. But that they were insinuating or they were speculating that they were like hired thugs from the Chinese government or hired by the Chinese government to do this. And yeah, that was like, and it's like, yeah, this ad for Epoch Times, for some reason, they're just reporting on this story of how their factory was attacked by the Chinese government.
Yeah, the thing that's so weird to me about it is the fact that it's such a blatant thing and a very subtle thing at the same time. Like it's a weird contradiction how in your face and yet also how kind of like don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain it all is. Like, cause it's like a doomsday cult where they have a literal like demonic Lenin like head leering at the audience. But then it's also like, if you don't know who those people are, I mean, I don't know how you don't know what Lenin looks like, but maybe you don't. If you don't know who those people are, then you're not aware of the story. So it's this weird thing of like, you're watching a movie on mute and like, that's enough for the people who made it, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it almost like it can't be overstated enough how bizarre this sequence of events is. And it's like, it's almost kind of astonishing that it isn't talked about more, like that it hasn't been a bigger deal in the way that QAnon became a big deal. And eventually it became a household term that everybody knew about. Every fucking news organization for several months there was just like they were publishing a QAnon related story almost every fucking week. And the idea that this like dance troupe that was scorned by the Chinese government in the 1990s and through this weird sequence of events ended up like creating this like propaganda machine for Donald Trump to win the presidency and like deny COVID. That's just, it's so bizarre and
it's so weird.
And even like, and we're talking about it now and it's not like it's some obscure thing that nobody knows about, but like I feel like it should be a bigger thing. Like it should be a bigger story. And almost like even this episode, like this almost like downplays it. Like this should be a 6-part episode. Like it's that crazy. It's that crazy of a story. I don't know if there's enough twists and turns and events to sustain 6 episodes, but like it's so crazy that it feels like it should be a bigger event.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It feels like it feels like culturally there should be like Leah Remini style documentaries about the Falun Gong and how like they fucked us during the 2016 elections culturally. But
yeah, and like what you were saying before, like Scientology is a big cultural deal in our country and the world. Like multiple documentaries, hundreds of podcasts that either are about Scientology or at least do episodes that talk about Scientology. Big sort of like cultural discussion around Scientology. Everybody knows what it is, what the tropes are, a lot of the history of what they've done. And this is weirder because the cult is not nearly as big or powerful. And they directly engaged in and arguably debatedly manipulated and influenced a presidential election in a way that Scientology can't even claim that it's done, except for in indirect ways of like donating to super PACs and shit.
Yeah. It's really surreal that it's not. It's surreal that it's happened, and it's also surreal that it's not a larger cultural institution like we're talking about. Like, how is there not like a Dateline episode, like, or a 60 Minutes, we go inside the Dragon Springs compound to talk to the man who spearheaded Trump's secret Facebook winning strategy and blah, 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 like, but it's not. No one really seems to care all that much.
Yeah. And it also just shows, it also shows that there's just like, there's a villain origin story for everything, because Like the idea that the fact that it ballooned to this is just absurd and insane. The fact that like there was this group of people that like, yeah, in China in the 80s and 90s who like, yeah, you could call them a cult. They never did anything really harmful in the way that some of the worst cults of history have, you know, Jonestown, Aum Shinrikyo, actual human casualties, abuse, so on and so forth. They were just kind of like hippies who just like danced. And the fact that they were censored by the Chinese government is like, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that they should have been, I don't think that what they were doing should have been made illegal. Like that doesn't seem right. Like in theory, I'm like, yeah, that's fucked up. Like that you just said that these people just couldn't like do their body movement rituals or whatever. Like who gives a fuck? And yet that long tail string of resentment and the need for revenge, eventually they had there was a crossroads where in this snowballing path of resentment, they crossed paths with this other thing that was completely unrelated in geographically, historically, culturally, just a whole different thing. And it just happened to line up in just the way that resulted in this fucking independent propaganda machine, like debatably influencing a U.S. presidential election. It's unreal.
I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
This has been Deep Cuts. You can find me online at heydavebaker.com, where you can pre-order my new book, Halloween Boy, which I just got notice from the printer is going to be at my house on Friday. So I'm going to be sending those bad boys out. So if you want one, go to the website and pre-order it. Spandrew, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me appearing in a YouTube ad that plays before the cooking tutorial that you're going to watch tomorrow, in which I covertly advertise a seemingly legit newspaper that's actually a secret propaganda arm for a improv group that was scorned because the Upright Citizens Brigade kicked them out for getting naked on stage too much. And you can't find me on social media because I don't use social media. But if you want to pay your respects to your dear beloved sweet Papa Pricey, you can get his book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye, by going to his website, dapricewrites.com. You can also follow us on social media, on Facebook, the Deep Cuts Podcast. You can join our Facebook group, Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. We talk about the show. We make memes. You can also join our Discord, bit.ly.com/Deep Cuts Discord. It's another community where we talk about the show, make memes. We also talk about other stuff in the Discord. You can follow us on Instagram at Deep Cuts Pod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. You can go to our website, deepcutspod.com, click on the shop. You can get shirts, hats, so on and so forth with cool Deep Cuts graphics. You can get our Mystery Treehouse Junior Sleuth shoulder patch. And there's like 2 Simple Code tape comics left. So if you want to get a hi-fi cassette tape release of our Napster musical, 9 original songs about the rise and fall of Napster, a pop-punk odyssey concept album that's bundled with a 5-page full-color comic book about the misadventures of Andrew, Dave, Hillsmer, and Zero, written by Papa Pricey, drawn by Brandon Nebbit, cover colors by Shannon Willett. $13.99, $12.99 actually. We have like 2 more. And once they're ordered, probably not going to be any more of them for the foreseeable future. So scoop them up. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.